Greetings, everybody. Welcome on this Father's Day in 2026. Great to see so many of you. Some of you are old veterans. Veterans, I won't say old veterans, or veterans of the Urantia movement. And we have kind of the ultimate veteran, Barbara Newsom, with us today. And I've been around a little bit myself. And I'm going to give a kind of a little intro for everything. But we're trying to be succinct today because there's a lot to cover and there's a lot at stake in knowing our history, our origins. And as you all know, origins relate to history, which relates to destiny. So we want to correlate these things. We want to give Barbara time to tell the story, and stories have beginning, middle, and end. So we're going to get through the story. Boy, a lot of people are coming in. We want to get through the story in the initial section of the discussion, and we are not going to take your questions. If you have burning questions, put them in the chat. I will curate them. There will be a kind of a natural break when Barbara's ready, but this is a narration of things that many have not heard before because Barbara's been in a unique position over decades to be a witness, not just a witness, but also a scholar of the sources that are available to only a few, and also the other sources that we all know of, the various books that have been written. There's more than a few. They're fairly impressive efforts, but a lot of things are missing that we need to look at and amplify. So we're going to take questions via the chat, but that break will come in a little while. And in the meantime, everybody is muted, um, and I will see to that. I'm going to just give a real quick intro on my interest in this in particular, because I happen to have been a student in Chicago beginning in the early 70s, but I found the book in 74 and had occasion to go to 533 um, during those years. I was there a 3-year period from 74 to 77 when I was a student in the South Side of Chicago and had quite an experience with meeting historical people who became historic personalities there that you just naturally meet in the building. And I went to the study groups. We need somebody that needs to mute, please, right away. Please mute, Rich. Okay. So, as I said, when the first time I got to 533, the way the intake happened is you would meet John Hales, who was like the administrative director. Then they would introduce you to Emma Christensen. And so I had the wonderful experience in 1974 of meeting her and getting a very dignified, introduction from a charismatic person to the movement. I will say that I felt that others that the general impression I had was of a place that was in a secretive kind of mood. They were not overly welcome, particularly welcoming, and but it was uplifting intellectually. Let's put it that way. To meet these people and see people who turned out to be very influential in the history we're going to hear. So, and had been influential over time. I think I'll stop there and introduce Barbara just by saying that she's a friend of mine. I met Barbara in the 80s, and she knew of my interest in history. So we've been in this conversation for decades. So this is like the culmination of something really grand for me. And I want you to know that she's a fellow historian. We're both trained in history. She worked very closely with key people from the 70s there at 533. And she had her own career in the nuclear industry over many decades. She just retired, in fact. But I'm going to let Barbara introduce herself from here on. And now we're turning this whole meeting over to Barbara for her narration about the history of the text and the movement. So it's all yours, Barbara, and thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you. And I thank all of you for making this possible for me. I have wanted to do this for a very long time, and I do want to say that part of what I'm sharing today, I have never shared before with a group this large. Some of my best close associates, like Byron and others, have heard some of the history, but I didn't ever want to share some of it until some of the missing history that I'm going to talk about had appeared. I really felt that some of the things that are missing from Urantia Foundation's record, for example, would someday be returned to them, and you'll hear about that whole history. Since it has not, and I'm older, I'm just going to tell you what I can or share my own records to the degree that they're useful, still with hope that whoever removed things from 533 Diversey Parkway over the years will provide some way of returning historical documents. Now, I'm not the only one that knows about the disappearances. It's well documented in Urantia Brotherhood minutes and things like that. But I had hoped for better documentation than I have, but I'll share with you all I have. And I've never done this before. Some of you were with me in the 1923 celebration of the announcement of the Urantia Book and the starting of the forum that we had in Chicago. And that's when I began thinking about how we might need to give you more than we've done so far. So this is my first effort, and I appreciate being able to do it in this way. So here we go. I grew up in Wichita, Kansas, and in my senior year in high school, my sister died in the fall of my senior year, which was 1964. And one reason I've never written the story for Saskia and how I found the Urantia book is it's still hard for me to talk about what happened to my sister and her friends in 1964. So forgive me, I do try. 8 people, many of whom were our best friends, died in a tragic car accident when I was a senior in high school. The driver was one of my best friends in my class who lived three houses down the street. My sister's best friend died with her that night. So I will tell you that that kind of tragedy makes your life different. And it wasn't long after that that a wonderful woman in the area introduced my mother to the Urantia book to try to help us with our grief. It's really a beautiful story, and it makes a difference to me almost every day. So I don't talk about it too often, but I want to be able to share some of these things that are so personal because for me, I was heading up to the University of Kansas a year after my sister died, and I had the Urantia book. And I met with a study group there my whole undergraduate career. This was 65. So yes, I met a lot of the early Urantia book readers in my generation at the University of Kansas. And then I was also working there in graduate school, which is where I started my work in nuclear weapons safety and security. I wanted to make money and I didn't have a job, so I was a researcher for the university contract that was studying that sort of thing in those days. And I ended up making a career in it, even though I didn't plan to. It's not the only part of the nuclear world that I work with, but that's how I started. So this is a long story of just what took me to Chicago is that I was visiting 533 Diversey Parkway frequently starting in 71. The people that introduced me to the book knew Christy and others very, very well. They had been to Chicago, they'd been to the Forum. So when I was able to travel on my own my first year in graduate school with another graduate school friend of mine, we went to a program at University of Chicago for a week and decided to visit 533 Diversey Parkway. So I met Christy in 71. And she immediately, in those days, was having a lot of us from KU stay with her whenever we visited Chicago. It was an easy drive for us. So I stayed with Christy and Martin in their home on the third floor quite a bit from 71 and whenever I could to when I moved to California in 74. Um, and then while I was still living in California, I was invited to work with John Hales as Associate Director of Urantia Brotherhood. So it's kind of a long intro to this, but that's how I happen to know history. So when I moved to Chicago in 75, I lived within walking distance of 533 Diversey Parkway because I was working there. And I didn't work long for Urantia Brotherhood. I wanted to continue my own career, and after a while just said that I would prefer to go back to my own career, which was basically contract work. So I could, and I said I can volunteer a lot because I do contract work. I have a lot of extra time. And I preferred to work as a volunteer. So not long after that, in the spring of 76, is when I started working with Christy on Urantia Foundation history. And if you've ever been to 533, maybe you've been to the third floor, I don't know, the top floor of the residences, but that's where we worked. The materials I'll talk to you about today, at that time, in 76, were all kept on the sun porch, if you will, of the third floor. And what that means on the third floor is that there's only one way to enter it, which is through Christie's bedroom, what was Christie's bedroom. And she there kept a full file cabinet of early days history of the Urantia movement. So, when did that all start? Way back in 1906. And that's where the longer story I'll tell you will be. But I was essentially working with the records in 76 that had been provided by the original Contact Commission. And it included the original copies of every communication that they kept. And you may have heard that they were not supposed to keep the communications in typewritten form that they had used during the transmission of the Urantia papers and also the study of the Urantia papers until they were published in 1955. However, people do have disagreements of what they think the records instructions were from the Revelatory Commission. And my understanding was that in order to write a history, which they were instructed to do right before the book was published, the Forum asked the Contact Commission, still through the human subject, what should we do about our history? This has been going on since 1906. That's almost 50 years of history by the time the book was published. What should we do? And they said, the history should be a story well told. And we've tried, but we haven't succeeded yet. So I hope what I share with you today will help us all know Urantia history of the Revelation as a story well told, because we're the last generation that can carry it on to the next group. So it's a beautiful story. So it begins in 1906 in Battle Creek, Michigan. And if you've read some of the history, you know that William Sadler, Lena Kellogg, Wilfred Kellogg, and Anna Kellogg all met in Battle Creek, Michigan. There's still a very large federal building there that was at one time the Kellogg family medical sanitarium that you may have read about in other histories. And by the way, I want to acknowledge all other Urantia historians because I'm only adding to what they've already done. I've worked with all of them. I know what they've done, and I'm going to put pieces to that history. So fortunately, it hasn't been published yet, but many of us have worked on documenting the first contact that those four people had with the revelators. So here we are in Battle Creek, Michigan, at the federal, what is now the federal building, and the four Kellogg Sadlers in the Kellogg Sadler family, um, who were very close by then. Dr. Sadler and Lena had married. I try to remember some of this by without looking, but they had married in 1897, and they met, of course, Lena had Wilfred, her cousin, at the wedding, and her sister, um, um, Anna. So they had become very close from the time that Dr. Sadler and Lena Sadler were married. And they remained close. They traveled together to Chicago. They went to many different um, ministries together in the Advent faith. So they were quite close by the time they lived for a short time in LaGrange, Illinois. And that's where the history of the papers starts, is 1906 in LaGrange, Illinois, which is a western suburb of Chicago, not too far from where I live now. Now, even though it's been hard to document that that is the beginning of the contacts that produce the papers, I would say that Urantia scholars, historians looking into all of this, have now documented 1906 in LaGrange to the standards that professional historians would accept. And there's been a difficulty really getting that kind of documentation until now. But I always understood it to be LaGrange in 1906, and now I'm pleased to say we have done the research that's needed to make that the starting point. So what happened in LaGrange in 1906? They were all living, as I understand it, in the same building. And if not, they were in that building when these contact experiences took place. But most of us believe that they were all living in the building on Callender Avenue in LaGrange. And so then you may know the story that the wife of the man who was having unusual experiences in his sleep went to the doctors, Sadler, William and Lena both, with a desire for them to observe her husband while he was sleeping. They did, and they were still, again, as we understand it, living in that apartment building, so they were able to easily go and observe him during his sleep. They didn't have to go outside, they were all together. And one night in these observations, Lena Sadler leaned over to this man who was having unusual breathing and movements of his face and mouth. She leaned forward and said, "Do you have something to say?" And that is when he spoke. And again, we're looking here at 1906. And they began to study these nighttime communication experiences that this man would have, as you probably read, completely unconscious. Never knew what happened to him at night unless the doctors told him what happened. And at this point, I forgot to mention that the Kellogg's, Anna and Wilfred, were the assistants, medical assistants to the Sadlers, all during the time that I mentioned in Battle Creek. That's how they all got together. They were all working together as medical health professionals. Um, Dr. Lena um, and her sister Anna was a nurse, so that made a lot of sense. And Wilfred, interestingly enough, was such a detail-oriented person that he was good at handling all the medical records and taking notes and doing a lot of that sort of work for the team. Really, they were a team of four, the Sadlers and the Kellogg's as medical professionals. So this made a lot of sense to them to work with this gentleman and his wife, um, as long as they were needed. In other words, the what we would call the human contact subject, the contact personality, was a patient of Dr. Sadler's, and he did so anonymously. They did not want his experiences to be known by name as a part of the record. And as some of you may know, in medical records, this is not uncommon even today. It's a little harder to remain confidential today in medical records than it was then. So they continued to work with this gentleman and to live in the same neighborhoods and areas until in 1921. I should mention, they didn't stay in LaGrange very long. They started living in Chicago. All of their Chicago addresses have been pretty well researched. So they weren't in LaGrange very long, maybe a year or two, a year and a half or two, as best we can tell. But then they started living close to each other, either in the same building or close by, in Chicago until in 1921, all four, Dr. Sadler, Lena, Wilfred, and Anna, moved into 533 Diversey Parkway, which became both their home and their medical office. So they found
Good.
533 Diversey.
Love you too.
And then if you have questions, let me know. But that's how they got to Diversey Parkway. Now, keep in mind, they're still working with this gentleman. It's hard for me to imagine how this would have been for him, but they were still regularly meeting and taking notes of whatever he spoke. Now, we don't have those records, but that's what they were doing in those days. They were still studying it. And as you know, in the Mind at Mischief book, there's an early Dr. Sadler description of those experiences. I'll very quickly mention.
She muted herself.
You're muted, Barbara.
I wonder how that happened. Sorry.
Nope, my fault. Sorry. I hit
Anyway,
the wrong button. Sorry there.
well, so where we leave off here, I know this is a long story, but
30 seconds. Sorry.
yeah. Let's see. So, well, where we are is in 533 and all the, just kind of giving you a sense of how close this group was and stayed close the whole way through, the four of them. And of course, this included the man who was the subject and his wife. And I don't know anything about them except that I don't know about children. I don't know anything. You may think you know who it is, but again, I'm pretty sure that they managed to keep the anonymity that they were asked to keep. At least that's my conclusion, even after all these years. So here we are at 533 Diversey Parkway. And then in 1923, as you probably know from other histories, Dr. Sadler went to the University of Kansas and was inspired to come back from that venture to start a forum study at home with Bill Sadler. And of course, Lena and the others agreed. So they started a forum meeting in 1923 where they would discuss topics of the day, whatever people just, it was a discussion group, a salon of the old type in Europe, that sort of thing. And then in the February 11 date of 1924, and I'm losing my train of thought on those early dates, but the contact commissioners were asked in early February 11, 1924, to begin the forum. Well, not to begin the forum, but to begin with the book project. That was the announcement of the book project. Later that summer and fall, the contact commissioners, what they weren't called contact commissioners until 1924. When Makaventa Melchizedek announced the beginning of the book project, February 11, 1924, that's when the contact commissioners began to think of themselves as the contact group. And later, that was formalized with the revelators with whom they'd been working all this time to be a closed group of people that would be called the contact commissioners. So all of that was taking place. And as Dr. Sadler and others have written, at that point, they became what would be called a closed group. They no longer had medical people observing the transmissions that were about the Urantia book. In fact, no one outside of that group was present for transmissions of what became the Urantia papers. They had many medical professionals, scientists studying this gentleman for some years, but when they were hearing communications related to the Urantia book, it was only to be the contact commissioners. The question comes up, did Bill Sadler Jr. know about it at the time? Yes, he did. However, he was not living at 533 Diversey Parkway. He was with the Marine Corps and he was traveling a lot. And he himself has written that he was not involved in those early contact sessions. He joined the contact sessions when he lived back in the building in 1939. I'm sorry, I've said the wrong date there. Well, yes, that would be right because let me think this through. 29 is what I mean to say because the contacts began in that 1924 period. The first paper was read, as many of you know, in January of 1925. This is all in Clarence Bowman's diary. Maybe not all of it, but most of it is substantiated in Clarence's diary. So Bill was involved from after the first set of papers came through, and the first 56, which is 1925 through 1929. And then the second set up through 1936, which is 196 papers, all of the main all the main papers we have now. And then the revision of the 196 papers started in 1939 and continued until 1943. Now, a few changes were made because the publication of the book was delayed due to World War II. Most of us think that's why, until 55. And only one very important but additions were added to the book once the source materials became available for the Urmia lectures. So it's kind of a long story, but you see how the whole situation developed. And Bill Sadler became would go to as many of the contact sessions as he could from 1929 forward. So I'll take a breath. I haven't mentioned that Christie joined in 1923. Emma Christensen, E.L. Christensen, had moved to Chicago as an administrative secretary. Her work history has been well documented by Sue Harvey. I'm so pleased about that. And Christie worked for the federal government. And she was still working full time when she started her work with the Contact Commission. But they had asked in around the 1923 timeframe, which is when Christie arrived and they met her in the hospital. She had been in an auto accident and hurt her arm, and she met Dr. Lena in the hospital close to 533 to Percy there. So Christie got involved in 1923 because the contact group at that point, when they found out what they had said even before the book project was announced was they were getting tired of taking notes. If you can imagine all these transmission sessions for years and taking notes, they were ready to have a stenographer come and help them. So that was Christie. She appeared on the scene and became their stenographer. And Christie then became the stenographer for all of the transmission contact sessions for the book project. When the book project was announced, Christie was there, and Christie was taking the stenographic notes. Now, how the papers appeared and how the papers developed, I will just say there were a variety of communication techniques used. One of them was Christie taking stenographic notes in addition to the papers that were transmitted. So the paper transmissions, the actual papers that we know today, were presented in a different way. And this is where I will also say that in my understanding of how I learned the history, all members of the contact group, in addition to hearing the communications through the human subject, all had communication contact, varying degrees and varying types, with the revelators. Now, this is a part that I'm trying to think who's written about this and printed it. That's part of the story that might not be too well known, that this was a group. And why I like the history I'm sharing with you is it's supported by the Urantia book. There's not anything I'm telling you that you can't find a reference that relates to it somewhere. In other words, all reservists are in a group. You are not, you may be an individual reservist, but whether you know it or not, according to paper 114, you're working with a group of celestials and also humans. The humans in the contact group may not know that they're working with you as a contact group, but the way it's described is that all of the contact that humans have in these unusual celestial ways are part of team efforts, which also fits with the way the Urantia book describes how they work with us, is in teams, in groups. It can be a small group or small team, but they're working in small teams and groups. So here we have an understanding that, at least within the 533 Diversey Parkway home, everyone who lives there, including some of the children over the years and offspring of the children, knew that these contacts were just regularly going on with their family, with their parents, with their grandparents, whatever the case might be. Now, when the book project started, and that's something I have not shared, but I'm going to share now, the contact group operated by instructions. They were told when the first set of papers was being transmitted that there were two other groups, one in Omaha, Nebraska, and the other one in Indiana, but none of us can pinpoint the city, just in the southern part of Indiana that's right south of Chicago. In that part of Indiana, there was a third group of people, and if the contact group did not follow the instructions of the revelatory group, the book project would be terminated with them and taken to one of these other two groups. Now, this was at the very start. They had to agree to do as best they could or understood it, what the revelatory group told them to do, or they would lose the project. So the contact group was very committed to doing what the revelatory group told them to do. And while they had a number of challenges over the years, they made it through to 1955 printing of the book in Chicago. No matter what happened, the revelatory group, according to the revelatory commissioners' histories, succeeded. Now, in 1955, October 12th, when the printed book started to be distributed, it arrived at 5:33 and was being distributed. They had been out of contact for 3 solid years. So their last contact was, as some of you have read, with a Melchizedek named Newsom in 1952. That was the last of the collection of contact commission records of the Revelatory Commission. So, before the book was published, as I quickly mentioned earlier, I'll repeat, both the forum and the contact group, who had been reading the papers and hearing about the contacts every week, except for summer session when they weren't meeting, there was always a communication from the revelators in addition to the papers, by the way. Tikki Harries, if you know her, is one of the ones that could tell me about that, as she was 16 years old, the youngest who ever joined the forum. And Tikki lived long enough to share that with a lot of us. But they were in communication regularly, and then the communication stopped. But they didn't stop for the contact commissioners. That's another part of history that's quite controversial, perhaps. No doubt, from everything. I've read as much as I can about what people think of these things. But Christie and Dr. Sadler, well, all of the contact commissioners were in complete contact with midwayers and others until they died. Some of that's recorded in history, some of it isn't. But that was the fact. There was not a cessation of communication with the celestial beings ever, including, in my view, up to this day. However, it was a very controversial subject that was very hard for people to cope with. And I do think it's worth letting people know that we can document it, and we will, so that at least the future generations understand that however limited it was, the contacts that were established starting in 1906 and beyond have remained in the Urantia movement to this day. Now, this is an accomplishment. The early founders had no idea how long they would remain in contact with celestial beings or how it would work. But they knew that they were. And they trained younger people, particularly in my generation and Byron's, about contact experiences. However, it's a very controversial subject, and it's not always been easy for people in my generation who experienced either knowledge of someone else's contact experiences as they think they had them, or our own. So here's where I want to be sure I cover most of the Urantia history. I think I gave you the stages of the book. We pretty much, the historians and scholars in the Urantia movement, have pretty much settled on dates so that there may be some disagreement, but we've at least settled on a set of dates that pretty much are supported by Clarence Bowman's diary also. By the way, I'm so thrilled that he kept a diary and that it's been published for what Saskia and Matthew have done. I don't know if I could do this without Clarence Bowman's diary. It's just such an important set of records and documentation to add to the best knowledge the rest of us have. And I'm talking because most of my generation who learned all of this have passed on, Mark Kulicke being one. I did want to talk about Mark's book, Birth of a Revelation. Mark and I were married when the disappearance of the history that I mentioned that was on the third floor, in well, it's really the fourth floor if you include the basement, but the third floor of the building, when it disappeared in 77, Mark and it disappeared before Mark and I were married. Mark and I were married in 77, but we were working together at the foundation building when this disappearance occurred. And when Christy announced it, Mark was still working full-time and I was doing volunteer work at the foundation all those years. So when Mark and I realized that the records in 1979, I didn't mention that. Christy discovered the records missing in the fall of 1979. Mark and I were married, and it didn't take us long to decide that we should write what history we knew, because we weren't likely to have anything if we didn't. Now, his history was published under his name because he did all of the writing. I helped him with it, but he's a wonderful writer, and I felt that his writing style was perfect for the job, and I still do. I just reread it this week just to remind myself of everything that Mark put in the third edition of Birth of a Revelation. And that was not well received, I would say, our effort at that. With four members who are still alive, some of them liked what we did and some of them didn't. I would say, by the way, if you ever knew Ruth Burton, Ruth was one of our big supporters. She helped me a lot as a member of the forum who could be someone I cite for some of the more detailed history of the Revelation. So that's kind of my whole story is we started writing history. Oh, and then there was the 1980 Urantia Brotherhood slide tape. I was on the executive committee of Urantia Brotherhood as publications chair, and I got the executive committee to let me show a slide tape of basic history. And so that began then to also be an important part of history because Christy was still alive. Christy approved every word of that, and she was not living when Mark wrote Birth of a Revelation, but Christy was living when we were working on history after the disappearance of the papers. They disappeared in 1979, and Christy and I kept meeting and working on history until she passed on. I will tell you that she was trying to get me to help Urantia Foundation publish. Tom Kendall supported publication of the history that the Revelators said Urantia Foundation should publish. However, we didn't succeed. Urantia Foundation was the group tasked to publish the Urantia history, that the forum and the contact commission would write together. And that's what was missing from Lena's files, were all of the letters from forum members about what the history should include. We lost a lot of history in 1979. I've often wondered, and I didn't ask her when she died. I was there, as many of us were, able to visit her right before she died. I never asked her why she didn't publish, but I knew that the main reason would be that it had to be done by the sitting trustees of Urantia Foundation, and I think it was hard for Christy to know that they were not complying with the direction they'd been given. Now, will Urantia Foundation ever publish history? At least I know that two of the current trustees are publishing history, and I do think that given what could have happened to both the Urantia movement and the history of the revelation itself, that the Urantia movement has managed to withstand and survive, in my view, a lot of conflict. A lot of people who might have kept us from where we are right this day together in our organizations. We made it through to this point, and the Urantia book has been translated into so many languages and is in so many parts of the world right now in study groups. I think we're at a really good point if we can all hang together. And I hope that knowing the whole history will help us do that.
Okay, Barbara.
I'm tired, but Byron,
Yeah.
is
I'm
that
gonna
good enough
pick up
history
there. Yeah, I think you've
for
covered
people to ask questions?
well, I have a lot of questions here in the chat. So
Well, I haven't been able to I haven't been able to even look at chat, and I can't now, Byron, because as some of you know, I'm losing my eyesight. It's another reason for getting these books done.
no, I'm curating the chat for you.
But but
So I'm
but
waiting
I
for
am this is the beginning of me trying to work with anyone who wants to on history, ask me questions. I've worked with a lot of the Urantia historian scholars. I mean, I can't say enough about Larry Mullins, about Sue Harvey, all of the people that have written histories. Um, but now we can all work together even more than we are, to get everything as best in order as we can. Go ahead with questions.
Yeah, there's some factual ones that are easy to
Yeah, to
work with.
fix.
We
Okay.
get through those quick. So
Okay.
Anna Kellogg
Yes.
was she was the wife, or was she? The question from Tom
Oh, they're
actually is,
cousins. I
oh,
forgot to mention that. They're in the family because she and Wilfred are cousins.
she and Wilfred are cousins. Okay,
Yeah.
that was the
I'm
question.
sorry. That's very important. I haven't told that story without reading it, so I'm learning how to talk with just knowing it and talking. But yes, they were cousins. And that's one thing, by the way, this is just Barb speaking, but every epical revelation was first delivered to a family. And this was a family, if you
Yeah,
include the in-laws.
extended family. Yes.
The same pattern for delivery of epical revelation persists for the 5 we've had on Urantia.
Second was several people asked about Norson.
Oh, yes.
Norson. And so to clarify, so there's a lot to say about Norson, even though few people have heard of Norson. One person, Rebecca, states that Norson spoke to her group at one point, and I'm
Yeah.
aware of Norson speaking to other
Hmm.
groups in the 90s and later. Also, that Norson third hand was heard third hand by Berkeley Elliott, that Norson was the new planetary prince of Urantia, but others believe he was an emergency. It was an emergency regency under the Most High Observer. And so,
I'm so glad you asked because I planned to address Norson today, and I haven't done it yet. Okay, Norson arrived in 1950, and Norson was communicating with the contact group during that time. And as you know, the contact group would receive communications about World War II, what was happening on the planet. We have a few of those that have been saved. And so, of course, the Contact Commission was concerned about, well, where are we after, at the point of 1950 with nuclear weapons? And Norson spent his first year with the contact group and the planetary government that's described in paper 114. He was here working with the Urantia planetary government, and we do need to update as to who's who. He came as a regent of Makiventa. That's the term used. He was a personal regent for Makiventa in 1950, and continues to work with Urantia, but his critical period with the group and the Contact Commission was in 1950, in that he spent his first year trying to prevent or postpone global war, a third global war. That was his task.
Thank you very much on that.
That was his task.
We could probably talk some more about
Right.
all
So,
that, but let's get to some, unless you have
yeah,
more.
so no, but he's, Norson had, as you know, there are many Melchizedeks working with Makiventa. So he's part of that group wherever he is at any particular point, as far as I know.
Thank you very much. So here's a little bit more advanced questions. The Urmia lectures that as you mentioned, I believe it is the case that, and this paraphrasing Rebecca's question, that these are, Rebecca calls it modernization. Jesus' teaching was modernized concerning political world conditions. What do you mean by the source materials that became available? I think you're talking about the Emery Reeves book or
Yes,
something like
yes.
that. Yeah. So is it, I don't think it's ever been stated publicly that this was an edition. I think you said in 1948, or did you give a date? I don't recall. But when was that?
Oh, I didn't say a date.
Okay. That's the
Um,
date that, yeah, I was told by somebody. So is that the
but
case?
it was in that time frame.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. I'm frustrated because, again, I have hopes that the papers that disappeared in 1979 from Urantia Foundation, and I realize over the years too, working with it, that others may have disappeared as well. I really hope that whoever removed things from 533 Diversity Parkway will someday bring them back. But until then, we just have to go with what we experienced and talked about rather than the documentation. But yes.
Barbara, if I
Other
may
questions?
insert my own question about that, just to get this sort of um, in a succinct form, that was
Oh,
it was in 1979. It was
mm-hmm.
from the entire cabinet was emptied out. It had
Right,
4 drawers, I think you told me once,
right.
and the is not known definitively and provably who took it. Maybe we shouldn't get into that today, but it is a fact of history that this is missing, and that these were unique documents in, that were sitting in an archive, and that some of them had been copied. I think you told me once.
Oh, yes. Oh, the good news when I did start working on history in 1980 is that um, Urantia Foundation wisely had a policy of making multiple copies, 3 copies. I believe that was directed by the relatives. And some of those copies have been found. That's the only reason we have history at all, is they were given to Julia Fenderson. I haven't even talked about Julia. Julia's records, unfortunately, that were given to Dwayne Faw by her for safekeeping, were lost in Dwayne Faw's fire. Nola Smith's records were also lost by fire. But I forgot to mention that the Contact Commission did, in fact, take papers outside of the 533 building before the book was published. That's a point of contention about history. One of the things Christy and I had trouble getting people to accept. is that the Contact Commission was allowed to do that, and I think it was wise myself on the part of the revelators that they always had 3 copies of an original, or 2 copies at best. But that's the practice back then. All we had were carbon copies. So, um, so through these tragedies of time and all, we didn't have the multiple copies available. What we do have was in trustees' files. In other words, if Christie had given, or Dr. both, had given copies of these things to trustees of Urantia Foundation, such as Tom Kindle's collection, and the Kindle collection is all with Urantia Foundation right now, we wouldn't have had much to work with in terms of the best copies of communications, for example. But it was her habit to share written documents with the trustees where they would have it in safekeeping in homes or wherever, so they wouldn't lose the documentation if they lost the original. But I was working with originals of Christie's that were the things that disappeared, or the foundations. She was the only living contact commissioner at the time I worked with her. I didn't ever meet Dr. Sadler. I didn't meet him in '69. I wish I had, but I didn't. Christie's the only one I knew.
Barbara, can you just give a rough estimate? How much was lost out of what was in that cabinet? Would you say 10%, 90%, 50%?
Oh, 100%.
No, but I mean that you recovered some of it.
Oh, we recovered.
So there was duplicates.
Oh, what we couldn't recover were the letters from forum members.
Right. That's from the 30s. Right?
Unless we get them from forum member files. And I'm hoping to, please tell everyone that you know that may have old records, grandchildren of forum members, whatever, send them to the Historical Society or to the foundation or somewhere, because we really need more records than we have before they go on to the trash somewhere.
So again, I'm going to ask you one more time. So can you give how much was lost, just so people have a rough idea?
Oh,
most of it, small.
Most of it.
Most of it. Yeah, most of it. That's what
because the most rare things, and some of them might not have been copied that well and maintained that well with other locations, were in that file cabinet. That's why they were there.
Right. Okay.
And in fact, I think had they not disappeared and had there not been so much disagreement among the trustees, even after 1979, before Christie died, some of that might have been maintained had it not disappeared. Whatever she did have that wasn't in the file cabinet, they did save. That much I know.
Very good. Now back to questions. We got Cheryl asks, my understanding is also that papers would not come through unless questions were asked.
Oh, yes.
And that is, I know, contested a bit. And it says no questions, no papers. Is that a correct understanding?
Absolutely. In fact, I forgot to mention that. This is my first time to do this without reading or looking at notes. Boy, that was the most important thing for the forum. I mean, hundreds of questions, hundreds of papers with questions. Wilfred Kellogg managed all of that. You know, if you were a member of the forum, you would write all your questions and give it to Wilfred.
Yeah.
And then he would compile them and make groups of questions on topics, sort out duplicate questions. And then they would, I forgot all about the safe and how they would leave questions and materials in and out of the safe. Oh my, there's so many stories about that. And I've counted up at least 7 or 8 different types of communication that the revelators had with people that I haven't even commented on. I think Mark Kulicki's history mentions most of them. But there were so many ways of communicating with people in the Contact Commission and the forum in those days. And of course, they were all under an oath of secrecy. They could talk to each other about this, but they couldn't talk outside of the contact group of the forum members. And they didn't. If you know forum families, like I know the Kulickis pretty well, They didn't talk until the book was published. If there was a spouse at home that was not part of the forum, they didn't tell them anything until the book was published. So
Thank you.
there was a lot of internal communication. And in the building itself, um, things disappeared in and out of the safe in various ways all the time. And as you may know, the contact commissioners readily say, A, that they never fully understood the contact communication experiences enough to really even describe it well, just that they were part of it, but to get very far in understanding what they were experiencing, it was hard for them, even for the Sadlers, the doctors. They just knew that it was working, and there were so many methods of communication. My view of this is that the revelators were also working to learn how to communicate with humans, because one of the things Christy taught me when I was with her was how hard it was for the revelators to find humans that were willing to work with them in communications that were going to be workable. That was one of the biggest problems on Urantia, even before the contact groups in the early part of the 20th century that could have received the book. They had three. They've had trouble communicating with humans all along, and
Sure.
that makes sense to most of us who are alive right now.
Yeah, of course.
So,
They would.
so
I want to move on to another question, if
yeah,
I
another
may.
question.
Yeah, this is a very good question from Mark Wood. From your knowledge, Barbara, which of the written histories written so far are the most reliable? Good
They're
question.
all reliable for what they present. Where they may be missing is possibly, I'll just give it, Larry Mullins and I have talked a lot ever since he published his book, but he didn't ever interview me or Carolyn or Mark Kulicki or his group. It was a whole group that produced Larry's book. But I started talking to Larry as soon as the book was published and grateful for it. And then we've shared a lot since then. But I would say one of the things that happened in those days is people were writing histories without necessarily sourcing the histories in the way that a scholar would do it. In other words, I won't write history on everything I've told you today. I have two primary or secondary sources besides me. I simply won't talk about it unless I've done the source work. But it's a lot of work and it's hard, and it wasn't available to people when some of these things were written either. So I'm just sympathetic to the historians who have done their best with what was available.
I want to just add my own little spin on that is that each one has obviously their own perspective, but wouldn't we want to do comparative work these days,
Oh, yeah.
bit by bit, and go through all the sources, which is what scholars always do anyway, right? You
Hmm.
look at all your sources, you compare them, and you contrast them, and you look at the source material that they use. You critique the source materials as well. Um, in that light, is there anyone? Well, can you add more? I mean, should everybody read the Larry Mullins history, which is called A History of the Urantia Papers, in order to get the background they need, or should it be some other source?
Well, I can tell you who we have to rely on a lot is Ernest Moyer. Um, Not that we agree with his interpretations or opinions on some things, but Moyer is um, one of the people that did the kind of documentation we need for some
Oh,
of what we write.
goodness, that's an interesting statement. Okay, good to know.
And
And what was the title of that book? Do you happen to have that handy? I don't remember.
I
A Birth,
Birth of a
was,
Revelation.
yeah, same as Mark
Yeah,
Twain.
and it's
Right.
pretty available. I will say this, I'm only just now deciding, and I have to do it because Mark copyrighted his work with Pat, who was his second wife. Um, but I'm pretty committed to one way or another reprinting Birth of a Revelation. When I read it last week, I realized it's a good one to have for people. And so
Very good.
I highly recommend, and we'll try to make more available, Mark Hulickey's Birth of Revelation, third edition. And then Larry Mullen's work, Sue Oliva's work on Christie is fabulous. I don't agree with Sue about her conclusions, but she's a professional historian, which the rest of us are not. I mean, we may be doing, as Byron says, professional history. I couldn't help myself because I have to write the history of nuclear war and weapons. And in my current work, I'm volunteering to try to keep us from using nuclear weapons around the world, the global groups I work with. But we really need, who else? I would say the books that I go to most would be, um, you know, those.
That being Mullins,
Yeah, Mullins.
Moyers,
Yeah.
and Mark Hulickey.
Yeah, and where I am now is now that I'm trying to do this. Well, of course, Clarence Bowman's diaries.
And Clarence Bowman's diaries.
Oh,
The
absolutely. I
Urantia
don't know where I'd be
diaries.
without Clarence Bowman's diaries. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of material now that people can go to. That's a great question. And what I'm trying to do is keep a bunch of us in touch, like Saskia, Matthew, me. I don't know if you ever knew Sheila Snyder, which there's a, well, I have to talk to Larry about this again too, but that year 2000 anniversary history that the foundation trustees the night before the party insisted Carolyn and I put our names on it. My name is misspelled, so at least people know that I was not a proofreader for that history. But but we did help write it. So I want to try to correct the year 2000 history that we had for the 50th anniversary of Urantia Foundation, just because if it comes up, I was planning to do that and never did it after the party. We didn't redistribute that book, but copies are coming around that really need to be corrected. Somebody just sent me another copy of it and said, "What about this?" So we're trying to correct history now, and I've got a team of people that all the historians seem to want to work together, happily together, without stress. At least the ones I've been talking to. So, so let's just all collaborate. It makes sense.
Thank you, Barbara. I was looking at people's questions, and
Yeah.
I missed whether did you just mention Marilyn Kulicki's work?
Oh, well,
Yeah, should we mention that?
well, yeah, Marilyn and I, gosh, she's better at this than I am. Her second cousins once removed by marriage. I mean, Marilyn and I work on history all the time as best we can. Oh, and then that's the other thing. A good example is just Kulicki records that she still has that we haven't even gone through. So, there's all this work to be done um, to get things as best in order as we can,
Yes.
given the imperfections of humans. I personally think we've done maybe better than even the revelators could have hoped. I really believe that. There's been so much that could have gone wrong by now. Every person here deserves every bit of credit for getting where we are, in my view.
Okay, very good. Wow. More questions.
Oh, including getting copyright off the table. I was so relieved.
You want to say more about that?
Well, it became such um an issue among Urantia book readers. It was just a relief to not have to think about whether the book is copyrighted or not.
Right, gotcha. Here's a question from Bob DeBold. It says, do we know of the methodology or mechanisms by which the extra UB content was delivered, the to contact commissioners and others? And then he's got a second question about the safe. Was the safe used or the sleeping subject? Actually, it doesn't. The grammar isn't quite right. So I'll just ask that first question. What's the methodology by which people were contacted other than the UB papers coming through?
Well, we do have that. I think Mark has a good list. I'm looking for it now, but I'll just start into it. Um, for the contact for the papers, just the transmission of the papers, I forgot to mention this, is very important. The human subject was completely unconscious when papers were transmitted. Oh, and I do need to mention that there was still a lot of transmission of material that became papers before the papers appeared in the safe. That whole process probably isn't well documented, and what it did involve was secondary midwayers who would use handwriting, sometimes that even looked like the subject's handwriting, or handwriting that didn't look like anyone's handwriting. All of that is true. There were all of these various experiences that people were having. In the case of the contact personality, his issue was that he was unconscious unless someone told him what happened. His mind was just, as best they can document, not involved in it, and that's unusual. That's one reason they needed contact commissioners present when the celestial beings were communicating through him to a group. It was for his safety that he was able to do these things. Always, this is another controversial point, for transmission of the papers, anything related to the papers of the Urantia book, it was always at 533 Diversey Parkway. They moved in 1921, all four of them to Diversey Parkway, and all of this took place in that building, in the basement.
Are you also saying that the Urantia Foundation and Fellowship are still getting instruction from our unseen friends today? Or were they, I'm going to add to that question, were they after 1955?
Christie was. And she's taken a lot of flack for that, but Christie was.
And is that documentable that she was, or how would you put that?
Oh, I'll document it. I have to.
Yeah.
It's part of the history. And as you know, I was very fortunate to be close to Christie. I will say there were some others who were also close to Christie, but they've passed on. And they've also left me permission to write whatever they passed on to me as well. Everybody, including David Elders, just everybody who's been involved in this, because we want to leave the best for the future generations that we can. And so, yes, the answer is I'm healthy and I'm trying to live a long time so I can help everyone get things done, because we have such a treasure of communication experiences. So to answer your question, I believe the revelators were learning how to communicate with us. I mean, they would leave notes for the contact group somewhere in the house. I mean, they would visit outside of the basement, as far as I understand it, at times. There was a lot of celestial communication that took place, but I can also write the history of why they didn't talk about it. I'll make that quick.
Okay.
They were told by the revelators to do this, to write history and to share the history. But right away, it was hard for forum members to know what to say, because as the contact group was, these people were concerned about following instructions. They didn't want to say the wrong thing. And they were not present for contacts, many of them. Julia Fenderson was, by the way. Julia had her own contact experiences, and we have records of that. But if you were a member of the forum who hadn't really had a communication experience with one of the celestials, you didn't feel like it was your place to talk about it. They should talk to a contact commissioner, or maybe talk to Julia, that sort of thing. So I think that the forum members that I knew were exceptionally careful about what they said to, like me, a young person. I know Clyde Bedell doesn't have the world's best reputation at times, but Clyde was one of the people that would always talk to me, and I learned, and I'm writing a lot of the history Clyde gave me just because he would talk to me along with others. So there was a whole thing about, well, what should we say? What's right for us to say? You know, they preferred a contact commissioner to handle a lot of the tough questions, but they didn't live very long.
More questions here, Barbara. There's
Oh
many.
yeah.
I can't
I'm
get to
sorry it's
all.
going so long, but
I can't
go
get to
ahead.
all of them. Several have asked. Well, here's Marvin Garwin. My understanding is that Gard and Maryland have been working for years on a comprehensive history to be published by the foundation, hopefully later this year. Do you know much more about this and whether they have had access to all the previous versions and materials?
I think the answer is yes to all of it. How much they've been able to use of all the materials, I don't know, but I think they have access to everything they needed for that particular book. Um, so when I talked to Marilyn a couple of days ago, that's in the last proofreading right now. And then one of two different presses may publish the book, but they do have a publisher.
Okay.
Just a question of
Which one of the two?
which one.
Yeah.
And Marilyn wants it published as soon as it can be published. So I know it should be coming as soon as this final proofreading is being done.
I see. Very good.
Right as we speak, it's being done, yes.
And here's a question for you as to your book. What is your plan for your own book? And not to put you on the spot too much, but
In order to give this presentation, I started a very rough outline. So send your questions and comments so I can keep making my outlines of the chapters.
Okay, thank you very much on that answer. There's more, but
Now, it's not
yeah.
that I haven't written things that I will put into the book. I have all kinds of things I've written over the years, but I have to get it all together now in one collection.
Can somebody out there send me a little note on the chat and tell me how to unmute everybody because it's not working somehow.
Oh,
And I'd like to do that, and I'm embarrassed, and I'm not a very good techie. So send me a note.
Byron, it just worked. I got a message to say that you asked to do the unmuting.
So you're able to speak, but okay, looks like
I can unmute too.
okay, good. Looks like well then speak
can
up.
unmute.
We got a few minutes, Nancy's, but we got Mark Wood. Did you want to do any follow-up, Mark, on your question about the most reliable texts?
I think that Barbara answered it very well. Quite happy with that.
thank you, Mark. I'm looking forward to working with you, by the way. I'm still getting you some articles, but this took place over that.
Nancy Hill, you're next.
Thank you. I just want to thank you, Barbara. We have met before. We were in study groups together.
Oh, yeah.
I just wanted to thank you for sharing this incredible history with us and your knowledge of this stuff that who knew? Well, I mean, people knew, but I didn't, and a lot of us didn't. And for you to have this knowledge and have retained it for so many years to be able to share it because, you know, you share it with 2, who share it with 4, who share it with 8, and that keeps the history alive. And it's going to really bug me that somebody took something like that. But I just wanted to thank you from all of us here, all of who we can't see.
Thank you, Nancy, very much.
I will say this about the missing records. It's my belief, after many years have passed, I kept expecting them to show up somewhere, somehow. I believe that whoever took them for safekeeping because this individual did not trust others at the time. So I'm praying that this individual, whoever they are, has left them at least to an heir or in his or her will, that sort of thing, so that we will eventually get the papers back.
So do we think we have any idea?
Well, let me tell you about the investigation effort, which started with me way back in 1979. I mean, I was the first suspect, which always makes me happy because at least it proves I knew where this stuff was. You know? I mean, it's a piece of evidence for me that I was immediately investigated. I'm also proud of the fact that Christy just said, "Oh, that's ridiculous. Barbara would never do anything like this," and she was right. But at least she stood up for me when I was investigated. But I understand the trustees had to do their due diligence. All right.
Good answer.
Go ahead, someone else.
Next would be Maria.
Hi guys, Maria and Francisco. Thank you, Barbara. That was awesome. Mike, in regards to you writing your book of an idea for a chapter, I mean, at least I would be intrigued. You speak about the people in the Regulatory Commission who had different experience, different techniques of attempted contact, whether it be automatic writing. You didn't say that, but I'm trying to think of the different ways.
Well,
somebody heard a voice, maybe a dream or whatever it is. It appears that they were trying to reach human beings in different ways. The idea of the word channeling had just started getting started in the consciousness of humanity. Today it's common, right? But back then that was like a taboo, probably.
Well, what I like are the words used in the Urantia book itself, the original text: transmitting, communicating. Because all of these methods are methods of communication of celestials and humans. One of my favorite questions for most people is, if you believe in God and prayer, how do you know you have an answer to prayer? What method? What happens for you that makes you feel you have an answer?
That's a good one. That's a good one, Barbara. Let's go to Thomas O'Keefe. Thomas, please.
Thanks, Byron. Well, both Mark and I had a question about the missing records, which I think that you may have answered. Which was who do you think who do you think took Christie's records, and what was the motivation for doing so? You just alluded to the fact, or you just made the statement that you thought they were taken by somebody to preserve them.
Yeah.
Why would somebody take them to preserve them by themselves? It's like whoever took all of the artifacts out of the museums in Iraq, they were many taken, and we don't even know where those artifacts ended up. Any idea, Barbara, on, first of all, who you think might have taken those records?
Most of us that investigated this have our suspicions. However, I prefer not to say any particular name because there were several people that had access. And in the beginning, forgive me, but I worked for the federal government in many ways for 50 years with clearances myself. I was afraid maybe outsiders took these things that were investigating us as a movement. But I'm pretty sure that's not what happened. It's certainly possible.
Okay. That's interesting. I wonder why outsiders who many didn't even know at that point about the movement, why they would take the records. This is a really more important question. It's a little bit long. I've never read that reservists are in teams or groups. Where does this come from? Do you really think that Celestials would threaten Dr. Sadler and his very confident team if they failed? Who were the members of these other teams?
Oh.
How is it that you knew there were other teams when the Urantia book itself says that the reservists, they don't even know that they are reservists?
Some of them don't know. I would say read the reservist section because that's where the teamwork, strong teamwork, is referred to.
It's mentioned.
in the
in the text itself.
Yeah, it's in the text. And of
Do you have
course,
a
when I'm
citation for
writing,
that? Either one of you, a citation?
yeah,
Bob, I see you shaking your head. Do you happen to know?
I could probably grab one quickly, a book, but
Well, let's not do that now.
no, but I
Oh,
promised to
Yeah, just look
include
it
some
up.
of these
okay.
references in what I'm writing. I did want to say something about, there was something I forgot to say about what was missing and all that. Oh, darn. Well, anyway, it'll come back to me
It'll come
maybe.
back. I
Okay,
want to add
thank you, Barbara.
something. Add something for you for your question. Most people think a particular person did take them who did have access,
Oh,
and I would say in that connection that if there were copyright challenges, which there were, then one would have to submit all the documentation by law. And so if that material was subpoenaed or was, requested by the other side, it would have to have been supplied. So somebody with a legal mind would be the one who would be worried about that.
You wouldn't be alluding to the fact that it may be Martin Myers.
That's not what I said.
Okay.
This reminded me of something. Oh dear, that I forgot to say, but it's fleeting again in my mind. About the missing records. Oh, it had to be someone, in my view. Oh, here's when it happened. It happened. Dwayne Faw helped me because he was trying to figure out who did it. Dwayne thinks it was taken on a day in the summer study up at Lake Forest Academy that summer. We didn't find the missing record until, let's say, the September meeting or thereabouts of the executive committee. But in late August, there was a summer study up at Lake Forest Academy, and Christy was gone from the building for a whole day. Not overnight, but a whole day. And Dwayne thinks that's when whoever took these papers took the papers. And it's very likely. And it would have to be someone that knew the building and knew where the papers were. So that narrowed the list of highly likely subjects down to people who did know those things.
Any guess on what those papers said?
Oh, yeah, I'll try to write my best memory of what was in there.
I think you've covered that pretty well.
Yeah.
Have you not? It's already, Thomas. If
Okay.
you
Thank
listen
you.
to the recording. Next is Rick Voss. It's all yours, Rick.
Barbara, I have a quick question for you. I think I've asked you this before, but I don't recall the answer. Who else has access to your notes and everything that you've put together so far? If something should happen to you, who would have that information?
My assistant that I pay to help me do this.
And who would know that assistant? Who would know who to contact?
The Urantia Historical Society.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be, because as some of you know, I was a founder and still helping the Urantia Historical Society. We started in 2005. And we have much more work to do. But that's where it would all be, is a historical society and a contractor we have that works with me. And also my family that I live with pretty much knows where everything is. So what I am trying to do is get it even better protected and organized, making enough copies, etc., of my own things. But what I've been trying to remember to say, I think, was something about well, just trying to do the best I can to make sure we have complete records.
Thank you.
I think on that note, we might want to close unless there's anybody has an urgent item, or if I missed anybody's chat. Intrude if I missed you. There's so many here. Yes, Barbara, if you have more. Please.
I do want to say something that I haven't really started talking with people about. I'm planning to write my own experiences, which are different from other people's, but nonetheless, my own communication experiences that I had that I haven't shared widely. Some of you know about them. But I think it's time for all of us to, with our guidance, share what we've experienced so that we can help each other in terms of what I believe is the revelatory group's effort to, in a safe way, improve communication with humans and celestials in a safe way. And some of us reading the Urantia book may have private experiences that we haven't shared. And it's, as I say, I'm inclined to share mine as part of that process because it helps us with what we're experiencing.
Haven't heard from you, Rebecca. So Rebecca next, and then back to Maria and Francisco.
Yeah, hi. I didn't quite get an answer about the Urmia lectures.
Oh yeah.
Was that something, did they have to wait for like after 34 for the source material for that? I mean, I know that was like there was a fight between the two angel groups, the Angels of Progress and the Angels of the Churches over that particular paper.
Yeah, we don't have all the details, but what we do know is that dispute had to be settled before it could be shared with the humans.
Okay, so that was one of the
Yeah,
later
it was a
papers
delay.
that came back and came in later. Okay, that was
that would I think we can document. Yeah.
Okay.
I want to add to that if I may, unless you have more, Rebecca, was that it? All you had? I want to add to that in my view, it was because the precipitating factor was Albert Einstein, who was a pro-world government from the early days after Hiroshima, became more and more active. And by 1947, he was cheerleading for the movement. And then in 1948, he joined officially the World Federalist Movement, giving it a lot of credibility because of that. And I think that was a turning point in what we're told. And I've never heard this until Marilyn Kulicki revealed it to me personally, that it was in 1948 that they changed that paper 134, and added the Urmia lectures, meaning this is a huge disruption in the production process. So they really, really meant to do it. And so, Barbara, if you want to add to that or correct what I said, and please do.
Oh, it's the way I understand it as well. And also that I was aware of records that Urantia Foundation had access to that I had hoped those are records Marilyn's worked with, for example, that eventually it would all be put together that were in the building, in the foundation building.
Okay.
The foundation
We're
building
not a very secure place, the foundation building.
was not a very secure place and not very well organized at times. There was so much in there. Scary. This is all in the basement, folks. So, but now it's been organized. Thank God for Marilyn. Go ahead.
I think there should be a
There's one more question, I think.
We're going to get to Spielberg and have him do a movie about the drama of what happened at 533 and who was contacted by who. Because be part of the disclosure process. One more from Maria and Francisco. Go ahead, please.
Hi, Barbara. Thank you so much for your presentation. I have two questions. Newsom Melchizedek, did he show himself in material form to his people, or was he communicating like? Okay.
Here's what I'm so glad you asked about material form. Very little visual experiences. Almost everything in those early days was auditory. I haven't addressed the few that were not, but it was, as I understand it, with Newsom, the same auditory communications that they always had.
And one more question. Wasn't God writing a book? Is he?
With Marilyn. It's Garden Marilyn. We talk about Marilyn, but Marilyn is at the end process with what GARD has already
I
done.
see.
Yeah.
Or to collaborate.
But this was their collaboration. Marilyn has been studying history deeply for 20 years. I asked her to start in 1976 with First Society history, with that little group. As the other Keelukey, she was a Keelukey then also. So she's been working on history that long, but 20 years on her own research for the book that she and GARD are publishing. It's amazing. Marilyn is a by PhD level researcher. Those are her qualifications, and she's done a wonderful job, and GARD as well.
Thank you very much for that. And one more thing, Francisco?
Say auditory. I'm a little confused. Does that mean that the sleeping subject mentioned them?
Or
Someone
they
else.
just, I should make that very clear. Or they were just speaking and heard it outside of themselves.
Okay.
I didn't get into the whole list of how people experienced their communications. They could experience internal sound as well that they considered from one of the celestials. They could hear it auditory outside of themselves as well. And most of it was auditory, unless it were written on a notepad, which is visual, or in handwriting. There were all of these methods used.
Thank you, Barbara, very much. Very good to have so many of you with us. I'm going to make as your host, some concluding remarks, if I may. One is that the Urantia movement has been behind the times in regard to telepathic contact. Now we have in the sciences plenty of evidence that there's such a thing as telepathic contact between human beings. That happens to be the major theme of the film everybody should see that just came out called Disclosure Day. And also was the major theme at the world's largest UFO conference that I attended with Urantia Book readers 3 weeks ago, was telepathy as a factor of contact with beings, what that field calls them ultra-terrestrials, as well as extraterrestrials. It's now just considered a routine matter almost by many of us. So the Urantia movement is not caught up with that because there was a prejudice that comes forward from Sadler's own effort to establish the uniqueness of the Urantia papers by contrasting it with so-called sordid performances of spiritualism. I think that was a bit of a straw man argument that he was doing, and that's a huge conversation because, as you stated, Barbara, the contact commissioners had their own personal contact ongoing, which is one instance of the fact that people can get contact with celestial beings if under the right conditions. Now, the issue of making such contacts reliable, we have a lot of experience with that. We have people here that have been involved with contact over decades, and we know a lot within the Urantia movement about contactees and how telepathic contact works. That has been a taboo topic, but this will change soon. Finally, I would say this, that Rodan Institute, which sponsored this of today's session, has a project called the Urantia Book Academy, which is to bring our work to the academic world. And this is a very big struggle that I've been involved in because we do not have scrutiny by academics at this time. We just don't. And I'm a witness to that because I go to all the conferences of the American Academy of Religion. And I'm here to tell you that scholars don't know about us. But one of the things that needs to be done is disinterested third-party independent scholars need to get access to this material, the source materials. And they are the ones that will come and will write histories and will use their methodology and their academic training to sort out these issues. There are dozens of issues here that are not really addressed in the way an academic would do so. There's very yeoman attempts to do it, but we're not there yet. And I'd like to get enlist your prayers for this. We're in a bit of a difficult consideration about getting funded to go to the next meeting of the American Academy of Religion and have a Urantia booth there, which is not an easy thing to do, to have 10,000 professors of religion, scrutinizing your booth. But we've done it in 2022. As you know, I started this in 22, then I did it again in 2024. And we're right at the point of giving up on this because there's not sufficient support within the Urantia movement for this kind of effort. And if that is the case, then what we will do is the Rodan Institute will independently set up an entity which will solicit scholarly contributions outside of the Urantia movement and inside the Urantia movement, and we will curate their papers. And as I've been kind of threatening to do for a couple of years, it's actually put out a Journal of Urantia Book Studies, which would be a primary project of the Rodan Institute. So I would like your prayers about that because it's not an easy thing to break out of the bubble that we're in, and it's really become concerning to many of us veterans that have been around this thing. It's when you get with the academic world, as I recently was in a seminary, nobody's heard of it, and there's no publications that they turn to that they can trust that are academic publications about the Urantia book. So it's a big project, and wish us well. We have a small team working on this right now. We got to make our decisions very soon in order to get a booth in Denver at the upcoming major conference. Unless there's anything else from anyone that they urgently want to get in, I'm going to let Barbara have the last word. Anything you want to add, Barbara? Well, Thomas had something brief.
Yeah, sorry, Byron. I did ask this question maybe because there was I sort of machine gunned Barbara with a lot of questions. Barbara, you've been around for a long time. You've got some good points. Why do you think the state of the movement is in the state that it is right now? What are we doing wrong? What are we doing right?
What we want, and this is just probably because I'm relationship oriented, is to keep making relationships and building cooperative, collaborative relationships with each other, readers with each other, to be able to work cooperatively and collaboratively on various service, to be of service that way for the revelation.
And what are we doing wrong so far that it is sort of stagnant? What do you think? What are the reasons for that?
Our own healing. If I were to speak to the organizations I belong to, I would say that we are in a place where we can heal among ourselves and thereby be of more service. And I also believe, as you can probably tell from my talking, that the relators and the angels, I'm particularly fond of angels. Angels are working with us all the time, just as they work with everyone on the planet. Every single human on the planet has guardian angels, and they are really trying to help us for the next 10 years at least and beyond. And some of the former communications from the relatory group says this, that there was a period of time of 100 years. You can read about that in the different communications that have been collected, where they're trying to help us. The Urantia book was given early so that we could progress. And I did want to say this as my closing. One of the things Christy taught me was that the main reason the Urantia revelation was given was to try to improve human ability to communicate with our celestial partners. It was one of the main reasons for the book itself. And I don't hear that stated very often. But here we are.
Okay, thank you.
On that note, let's conclude. Thank you so much, Barbara. Let's give Barbara a hand, everybody. Thank you so much for coming and having the courage to state things that
Well,
have never been stated.
it's this audience that made me able to do this. I wouldn't do this with any other audience except you that showed up today. But thank you for giving me a chance to get started.
Thank you, everybody. And
Thank
we'll
you very much.
look forward to seeing you all the next time. And happy Father's Day to all.
Happy
Bye-bye now.
Father's Day.
Thank you.
God bless you.
Namaste.
Stay in touch.
We'll see you at a Silmar.
See la Philifar.